Hello, friends. Today's interview is really interesting. You ever thought about taking cannabis for pain, for a psychological issue, but you don't know really what to take, and it kind of feels like you're not exactly sure how to negotiate this whole system? What if your DNA informed exactly what kind of medicine is something that would work for you, that it was prescribed in a way that could help you with your ADHD, help you with your joint pain, help you with fill in the blank? Well, that is exactly what my guest today, Len May, does. He is incredibly brilliant. And the way that he talks about how to ensure that you are getting the right dose of cannabis to help you with whatever it is that you're dealing with, it's amazing. And he has a wonderful individual story to tell about his own life as well. Enjoy Mindful Mutiny today. Welcome to the Mindful Mutiny podcast. I'm Jeremy, and I founded Mindful Mutiny as a podcast, a community, and a commitment to live a high-frequency life. I want to help you cultivate purpose, clarity, and structure. I'm an experienced therapist, transformational coach, former executive, and psychedelic specialist. Go to mindfulmutiny.com to subscribe to my newsletter, schedule a consultation, or just to get more information about what my coaching can do for you. If you support positivity, I'd be honored to have you as a Patreon subscriber. On Patreon, there will be bonus material and a community of Mindful Mutiny fans that believe in human potential and living a high-value life. Also, check out the link in the description for my spring store with merchandise that supports the Mindful Mutiny podcast. Mindful Mutiny is sponsored by Exponential Intelligence. Exponential Intelligence teaches you how to raise your consciousness and be the most wise, evolved, and brilliant version of yourself. See the link in the description of this podcast to learn more about this incredible sponsor. Mindful Mutiny is also sponsored by Pachamama Sacred Paths. Pachamama's mission is to facilitate individual awakening through sacred plant medicine, spiritual retreats, and ancient teachings, ultimately contributing to the collective ascension of consciousness. With over a decade of experience hosting retreats, Pachamama is distinguished by its commitment to ancient wisdom, shamanic practice, and ethical care for participants. See the link in the description of this podcast to learn more about this incredible sponsor. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Mindful Mutiny podcast, Len May. Len, thank you so much for being on Mindful Mutiny.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
Len May is a leading expert in personalized medicine, specializing in medicinal cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. As the CEO and co-founder of EndoDNA, he revolutionizes wellness through DNA-based technology that offers customized health solutions. With over 25 years of pioneering experience and successful exits from 3 companies, Len is a sought-after speaker, author, and industry leader in genomics and epigenetics. He hosts the popular Everything is Personal podcast, where he explores wellness, creativity, and cutting-edge science to a global audience. Len's work embodies commitment to advancing personalized medicine through clinical trials, academic contributions, and thought leadership. And my favorite part of this is that Len was personally knocked out in a hotel room by Mickey Rourke, and he wrote about it in his book. And so I'm really super excited to ask you about your whole life and your story and everything. And so can we just simply start, because I read your wonderful book, and I want to making cannabis personal, and I want to ask you more about what you're doing right now.
Oh, well, first of all, I think I cut down my bio. That took like 20 minutes of the podcast. But what I'm doing right now is my focus is on personalized and precision health and wellness. The main thing that my company is trying to solve is to help healthcare professionals and patients like you and I to have a collaborative experience with their healthcare professional. And I really believe that genetics are a big start and a big part of that. Understanding genetics it's complicated, but it's also not complicated, because the idea of using your DNA is like having your GPS of life. So this is your life's GPS unit. It shows you where your own potholes are in your own road. And if you and your healthcare professional understand that, you can make lifestyle choices accordingly to make sure that you sort of avoid or navigate around those personal potholes in the road. So EndoDNA is the vehicle for that. It's a DNA testing company. We do genetic testing analysis, and we actually provide healthcare professionals that level of knowledge so they can look to see what the genetic predisposition is, provide a treatment plan that's customized to the individual person, it's personalized, and then measure the efficacy of that using an epigenetic response. So it sort of bookends the experience. And one of the main things about that is the feedback loop. So the machine learning algorithm, which we have a patent on it as well, is to say to the healthcare professional, there's 100 people with a similar genotype to you that took this protocol and showed that it was efficacious and worked for them. And that's the way, we get precise and personalized.
So a lot of the specialty that you talk about in your book is obviously the specialty that you have with cannabis. And I know that the average person goes, I've tried various different pain relievers, I've tried creams, I've tried, and the pharmaceutical stuff isn't working for me. I've heard that I could try cannabis for something. And so oftentimes there's this concept that cannabis is just one thing. And so these people, they end up going maybe to a dispensary and they are looking for some advice. And I know that you have a lot to say about this with regard to the training of the persons who are at um, the dispensaries and everything like that, because you've developed training for these people. But also to just know that there's several different strains of this medicine, and that the way that your DNA is made up, there's a specific set of cocktails for you for dealing with pain, dealing with anxiety, dealing with ADHD, and all of this. And so I guess to narrow this whole thing down into a question for you, it is, can you explain how you came to use the DNA footprint to help people understand how to use plant-based medicine properly?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the association with cannabis as being a plant, think of it as a ligand or anything else. And I think the confusion is that we're taking this into our bodies exogenously, and it works different for different people. And the reason why is because we all have a different endocannabinoid system. And that's where I think the basis of this conversation needs to start, and the use of just drugs or plant medicine or medicine in general. And I'll start by giving an example of cocaine. I'm not talking or advocating for cocaine, but it's a Schedule II narcotic. It's prescribed as medicine. And I think the way that people need to start looking at this is that we have a system inside our bodies with receptors that actually create endogenous chemical reactions in our bodies. And when we consume a substance that's exogenous outside of ourselves, so cocaine, it'll bind to that receptor, which is a dopamine receptor, and it'll squirt a bunch of dopamine into your bloodstream. Once there's 100 times more dopamine or more than you would normally get. And your brain is saying, oh, I love this. This feels great. Dopamine is exceptional. And we have genes that make us dependence gene on dopamine. It's one of the most addictive or dependent substances our own neurochemistry can create. And when your brain says, okay, when that drops off, so there's a reabsorption of that dopamine, your brain's saying, well, you know what, I can conserve energy, and I can actually send a signal to say, you know what, give me more of that. So your brain sends a signal, you're saying, I want more of that cocaine exogenously to squirt more dopamine. So it's not the cocaine, it's the dopamine that we are being, that we really want to express more of. So in cannabis, think about using that example as the endocannabinoid system. So we have this incredible system. It evolved with us. There's a lot of different things through evolution, through millions of years that went away, thousands of years. What do we need our appendix for? Probably was a use before, but no longer there, but it's still there. So through evolution, we evolved, but the endocannabinoid system is still part of that. So the endocannabinoid system was discovered in 1992 by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, an Israeli scientist. And that system is our primary modulating system. It's used to regulate the other systems to keep our bodies in what's called homeostasis or balance. And the way that it does that is it gets signals from the other systems, sends it up the central nervous system, like salmon swimming upstream to your brain, and your brain then releases its own neurochemicals. And the two that it releases are called anandamide, or the symbol is AEA. The word ananda means bliss in Sanskrit. So this is a bliss molecule that's being released. And the second one is 2AG. So now that you're releasing those, now you're able to look at your immune system or your endocrine system, et cetera, and get them back in balance. Now, the challenge is that we all have our own personal endocannabinoid system, and we may not be producing enough of our own endogenous endocannabinoids, or we could have a genetic predisposition that shows that we may produce an enzyme that breaks down our anandamide much more rapidly than the average person. So we're not getting enough of our anandamide. And if that happens, we're lucky that we found this one plant in nature so far. There could be other ones that have a phytocannabinoid. So the plant is producing this that binds to our receptors. And we have receptors for this, which are called the CB1 and CB2 receptor. So when we consume delta 9 THC, which is the decarboxylated version of THC cannabis. So when it comes from the plant, it has an acid molecule attached to it. So it's THCA. When you heat it, it drops the acid molecule and it has a perfect binding to your CB1 receptor. When it binds to your CB1 receptor, which is located more in your brain and central nervous system, it releases anandamide. And when we consume CBDA, you heat it and it drops the acid molecule. It has an affinity for the CB2 receptor, which is located in your immune, digestive system, et cetera. So think about it as body and brain, and releases an 2AG. So now that we know how much specifically each individual needs, now we can work on rebalancing our endocannabinoid system and keeping us in what's called homeostasis. And when I talk about genetics, as I just mentioned now, everybody has their own personal endocannabinoid system. We have deficiencies, we have different things. And when we take too much, like THC, for instance, has a very narrow therapeutic window. So if you're taking more than what you need, it depends on your genetic predisposition. You can have an adverse response. So you can turn on the switch. For some people get anxiety because you have a predisposition to stress reactivity. Some people are prone to PTSD, can trigger that as well. Some people are more prone to depressive states, so you can actually trigger that also. So to find the right mixture of cannabinoids, so you have this amazing plant, there's over 400 different molecules, and maybe even have more. And each one of those, the only two that we know that have an affinity for receptors, I mentioned THC and CBD. We also have these essential oils in the plant, which are called terpenes or terpenoids, and they give it its smell, but they also work in conjunction with the cannabinoids to produce an effect. So when you have this whole cocktail, we're trying to figure out why certain things work for certain people and why certain things don't work for other people. And the pharmaceutical industry is very used to having single molecules. So you know how when they create a synthetic THC, Marinol, for instance, it's one molecule, but we have this supporting cast. So trying to figure out the supporting cast of how those other ingredients, it's called the entourage effect, work for those individuals. That's one of the things that we specialize in.
So I want to kind of this stuff that you're explaining. Every single person has their own special DNA print. We know this. And so when you can see this, and I believe, do you take the 23andMe stuff and look at that and then help the person with whatever it is that they need, and you look at the DNA on that and work into that? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the ways we can take a raw data file from any other genetic company like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, but we have our own endocannabinoid system test, or, we have our own DNA test. So basically the way it works is you have a you go to the website or you go to your doctor, you get a DNA test. It's the same as all those other tests. It's a buccal swab. You swab the inside of your cheek, you register it because we're HIPAA and GDPR compliant. And when you register it, it becomes you're de-identified. So you have a record locator that's associated with you, and then you would take that sample and send it to our lab. Right, it takes about 2 to 4 weeks to get your results. Right now, we're averaging about 22 days. Once you get your results, you would log into your portal, which is called My DNA Live, and then you would go in and see your results. So the results that you would get are color coded and are based on symptomatic conditions. So to describe it to individuals, there's probably about 130 different reports that we get, and this is for the endocannabinoid system. But we also have, menopause, male hormone health, and female hormone health. But just specifically for the endocannabinoid system, you're looking at symptomatic conditions, as I mentioned. So cognitive conditions. So you're looking at predispositions to anxiety, stress reactivity. You're looking at predispositions to PTSD, fear extinction. Then you're looking at metabolic function. How do you metabolize? So there's a series of genes called cytochrome P450. They're metabolic genes, markers for how we metabolize certain things. So there's one for gluten, there's one for lactose. So this will give us an indication how somebody metabolizes or lack of metabolism for some of those. So you can see dosing wise, it's really specific too. So if I am an ultra rapid metabolizer, I'm, creating really expensive urine. If I'm taking one tincture of CBD, maybe it's not going to be efficacious. It doesn't work for me. Maybe I need 2 or 3. And that's where the doctor says, take 2 of these and call me in the morning. Well, why not 4 or not 1? So being specific to dosing is really important. That's having to do with pharmacogenomics and pharmacokinetics. And we're looking at drug-to-drug interaction as well. So if somebody's taking prescription medication or other supplementation, there could be interactions between them. Some of them can be inducers. Some of them can reduce the efficacy of that medication. So not to combine those two are really important. And then the last part of that is, well, now I found out what's my secret sauce of cannabinoids and terpenes, and now I know how much to dose. Where do I get the products? And what we do is we run an algorithm on products using what's called the certificate of analysis, so which is a test result of a product. And then we match that with your genetic predisposition and show you these products are maybe an 80% match based on your genetics of efficacy, how these products work for you. But the main thing is to mitigate possible adverse events. That is our overall goal. When we met with the FDA, they asked us, what is the purpose of your test? And we told them to help people either mitigate or avoid a possible adverse event so they can find what's their sweet spot. And that's how we operate.
So now I've got ADHD and I work with a lot of people who have ADHD. And what I'm really hearing from you is that can't really make an overall recommendation for something that's good for you necessarily until we actually look at the data. Because the data for my particular system is going to be different, and that's going to change what exactly it is that's recommended for me to be able to focus better. But that I know that a lot of the really popular thing right now is for people to get on Adderall because it feels amazing, but it's also a really hard amphetamine, and it loses its potency as somebody keeps taking it years after years after years. And so if somebody comes to you, has something like what I have and is looking for, and I love that part of your book was about ADHD. You run them through the DNA test first and then make the recommendations based upon all of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why I started consuming cannabis in the first place. So I was the kid and sat in class. The teacher would call me and I would be daydreaming. My mind wasn't focused. And the reason why is because I wasn't stimulated. So what happens to us is we have a depletion of dopamine. And when you're born with a depletion of dopamine, your brain is always trying to find the next squirt of dopamine. So we have these squirrel moments. Squirrel, yeah, this is fun. This is fun. Let's go there. Let's go here. So when you are when you have uncontrolled ADHD, I never looked at it as a disorder until I was diagnosed. You have this disorder. Let me put you on medication. I'm like, oh shit, there's something wrong with me. I have a disorder. But it's not a disorder. You are different than other people, and you have to work within your strengths. And for me, ADD or ADHD is a superpower. Once you know how to create your guardrails that are specific to you, and because we have the ability to hyper focus, so it depends on where we hyper focus on. If we have a lot of dopamine that's being squirted from something that's stimulating to us, like, I paint, for instance. So if I'm in the studio and I would paint, I would sit there for 6 hours and paint I'm actually stimulated. I'm getting a lot of dopamine and I'm hyper focused. I can do this for all day. But video game designers design video games for kids to sit there all day and get that dopamine squirt. And that's why, oh, I have ADHD. But you really do? But how come you can play a video game for 6, 8, 9 hours a day? Really? So you're getting that stimulation. So let's focus on getting stimulation from things that are positive instead of things that are detracting from you. So creating systems and all those other things. But when I got put on prescription medication, I can't say it didn't work. You're right, Jeremy. They work, meaning they allow you to focus. But my personal feeling was the word feeling, it removed my sense of self. So I would have this, I could go through my day, not happy, not sad, not feeling love for people, but I could focus. But it removed that sense. And I was hanging out with these older kids, and they asked me if I wanted to smoke a cigarette. And the story. There's one cigarette which I never actually asked why there was one. They passed it around, and I smoked the cigarette, and it tasted weird. And I smoked it again, may have coughed or not, and they were laughing. They put cannabis in that cigarette. And when I went back to class, the windows that are open in my head all the time, it sort of narrowed and could help me focus. And that was my introduction to how it can work for me. So I gave up all the prescription medication and I started consuming, cannabis as my medicine. I never really told anybody there was medicine for me, but it helped me to focus. And by the way, there's genes for ADHD. You have genetic predisposition for that. Your lifestyle can help trigger that epigenetic expression also. But to understand how phytocannabinoids, what is good for you, there's certain things that actually can trigger, more of an ADHD response. So you have to understand that, your bucket is your bucket. These are the cannabinoids and terpenes that align better with you, and they can be more efficacious and helpful.
Through your life, you've had to fight an uphill battle. And it's an uphill battle with legislation, with perception, with legality in certain areas. And there's been wins and there's been fails and so forth. Can you talk about where we are at right now in the acceptance of this, in the path forward, and where you see this going in, like, just for say, like the next 5 years, because this is real medicine that it obviously competes with big pharma. But can you talk about where you see this going realistically?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel that it competes with big pharma. I feel that big pharma hasn't figured out a way how to monetize off it yet. And the challenge is that it's multiple molecules. When they dipped their toe in the water during the AIDS epidemic, they said, oh, well, we know, Brownie Mary, and they go into the hospitals and they provide cannabis brownies to AIDS patients. And you know what? It's working for them. They're getting their appetite. It reduces this. So they're like, we're going to synthesize the molecule and we're going to give it. And it didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work is because it only had one path of action associated with it, which was the synthetic THC, which secreted AEA or anandamide, which actually just made people that were taking it sedated. So they just put them to sleep, but it didn't stimulate appetite. And one of the reasons is because the other molecules that are associated with it, we don't really know yet 100%, but what it does, it sends a signal to the vagus nerve, gut, the axis between your brain and your gut, and it creates a signal to stimulate more what's called ghrelin production. Ghrelin is our signaling for making us hungry or satiated. And that's a big difference because when we consume THC delta 9, you never heard anybody having munchies for kale. right? Nobody wants kale. Oh man, that kale salad looks so good right now. No, you want to have fat, sugar, and salt. So you want to feel satiated. So they're trying to replicate some of those things. So we do have an FDA approved drug for childhood epilepsy called for Dravet syndrome called Epidiolex, which is now owned. It was created by GW Pharmaceuticals. Now it's owned by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So big pharma is stepping into this role, but this all started based on legislation and based on, I'm going to say racism in a way. And somebody can go and research this. But what happened was in the 20s, when the jazz culture started moving in to the United States, there was a Black and white people were mingling together, participating in listening to music. And as we started moving in the 30s, the farm workers from Mexico started coming in. And they started bringing marijuana. It was not called marijuana. That's the Mexican farm workers were calling it that, and it was brought to the United States, and the jazz musicians were consuming it. So the white dads of the white girls that were mingling in these jazz places said, no, 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 we don't want that to happen. We want that separation. So they started enacting laws. And some of the people that started doing this in the first place was William Randolph Hearst of the Hearst newspaper, Dynasty paper, and DuPont as well. They were partnering together to create synthetic clothing. Prior to that, we're using hemp for a lot of different things. Hemp for clothes, hemp for paper to write on. And, we were growing, our forefathers were growing it. We brought it here on the Mayflower, etc. So the interesting thing that happened was they nominated this person named Harry Anslinger, who was the precursor to what we know as the DEA right now. And they created in the 1937 Marijuana Stamp Tax Act that actually started punishing people for cultivating cannabis, hemp, and any variety, and started prosecuting people. And it's not until Richard Nixon came into power where he actually created this scheduling of drugs. And a lot of it was stimulated based on the hippie culture. The hippies are consuming, this weed and all this other stuff. He ignored his own commission that he put in place that showed that there is actually medical purposes and medical efficacy for cannabis. He ignored that completely and made this a Schedule 1 narcotic, which means it has no medicinal purpose whatsoever. The irony of this is the U.S. government has patents or had patents on cannabis as a neuroprotectant, among other things. And when I actually became the president of the Cannabis Action Network, I know I'm sort of skipping all over the place, but one of the reasons why this is important to the subject and the topic at hand is because my keynote speaker, who was speaking at Independence Hall in Philadelphia with Liberty Bell and all that other stuff, she had a prescription, a federal prescription for cannabis. And you're like saying, wait a second, Schedule 1 narcotic, it doesn't have any medicinal purposes, but then our government's saying it does for 16 people. They're growing it. The federal government grows it in the University of Mississippi, rolls it into cigarettes with a USDA label, and actually provides that to those patients. So there's a lot of irony. And, you have the Reagan, Nancy Reagan, your brain on drugs campaign, so there's a stigma associated with that. To answer your question more directly, where I think we're going with this is we need to reschedule and create actual clinical and observational studies that show how we already know it's medicine, but what are the mechanisms that it works on? And there's different paths for that. You can reschedule cannabis to a Schedule 3 or 4 so you can get it prescribed. And you also have a nutraceutical path on that already exists in place now. So there probably is going to be a level of the amount of THC, which is the ingredient that gives you that euphoric high feeling. Your runner's high squirts anandamide too, but this is a lot more than that. So we have dual paths. There's a prescriptive path that, your doctor can write. And one of the challenges to that is we don't have that classification of drugs yet, which we will once we reschedule, and the path to action for a specific condition. So what I mean by that, Jeremy, your doctor can say, you know what? You can take a prescription version of vitamin D, 5,000 IUs. They prescribe it to you. You can go get it. But the difference is that when you get your vitamin D, whether you're in Philadelphia, whether you're in LA, you know exactly what you're putting in your body. There is a regulation that's overseeing that to make sure our labels are correct, our testing is correct. So we get consistency. And that's what's missing in the cannabis industry. And the same thing for your nutraceutical. You can actually go into any vitamin shop and know that you're putting, the exact same thing in your body. Or when you go into your pharmacy, there are other things that you can get that you don't need a prescription for, but you need to show your ID. So I'm 21 and over. Now I can go get the product that maybe supports sleep. So it's not making a claim that it cures you from insomnia, but it supports you to sleep better. So these mechanisms already exist. So in the next 5 years or so, that's where I think the path is we have dual paths, nutraceutical, pharmaceutical, and that's where I think, we'll look at real drug discovery.
There's so many different ways to go here, but I have a question for you about, at a certain point, you were recognizing that people were getting all sorts of different types of information about what to take. And you go from this provider to that provider, and the recommendations were wildly different. And so you put together an actual training to train not only people who are working in the dispensaries, but also people who are medical providers were really interested in learning more about this. Can you talk about that and education that you still do for providers?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me that we have this medicine, and it is medicine. We have this medicine, and the path to actually recommend this medicine, we're counting on a young person in a store that really doesn't have a lot of education, and are given this, product that's a medicine to a person that may actually experience some adverse effects without knowing anything about them. And I found it to be, a challenge, because there are adverse effects from anything. You can take too much, acetaminophen and have an adverse effect. It doesn't matter. Or, so the idea is to make sure that when you're dealing with bud tenders, you train them to look at what is a symptomatic condition that somebody's trying to address to avoid possible adverse events. So yes, they should be taking a DNA test, absolutely. But even if they're not, just to understand that less is more and not focus on this whole thing. The first country that created a medical cannabis program is Israel. So they came out with this book called the Green Book. And in the Green Book, it talked about milligram per kilogram of weight. Well, I always found that to be a challenge, because like my business partner is a much bigger man than me. He's taller, he weighs more, but if he takes 10 milligrams of THC, he'll be off for 2 days. Me, I'll be normal. I can have a conversation with you because I'm a normal metabolizer. He's a slow metabolizer. So weight has nothing to do with it. It has to do with your metabolic function. So training bud tenders on making sure that they low and slow, and don't make any claims. Don't talk about what it can do, what it can cure. Just look at avoiding possible adverse effects for people. When Grandma Mary walks into a dispensary, first of all, she should not be given concentrates. There's way too high THC products for certain individuals. Start with something that is more balanced, more CBD, less THC, something of that nature. So those programs exist where we train bud tenders to do that. But I don't want to take anybody's job away, but we should be circumventing the bud tender and understanding what it is that we should be putting in our bodies. And the bud tender should just guide us to where those products are located in the dispensary. As far as doctors go, there's two things. First of all, doctors don't know genetics, a lot of them. Functional medical professionals, integrative doctors, DOs, doctors of osteopathic medicine, which I actually lectured graduate students for their medical program on two things: genetics, how does DNA work, what is DNA, because they had a class, it's an overview, and then the endocannabinoid system. So you mentioned, Jeremy, about us all being different. Well, the interesting part about it is 99.9% of us genetically are identical. It's that 0.1% that makes the difference. And if you understand where you differ from other people, you can take a little bit of a different path to make sure that you avoid or mitigate those possible adverse effects. So training doctors or healthcare professionals, genetics, epigenetics, what happens when you turn those switches on, and making sure you don't turn on a switch you may not want to turn on, and you turn certain things off. And then that feedback loop on how is it working for that patient, so we can start creating, I hate to use putting people in buckets. I can't think of a better word, but really putting people in buckets. Like there's 100 people who are similar to you that showed efficacy on that. And that's the training part for healthcare professionals, because, you know, it's been discovered in 1992, the endocannabinoid system. I talked to healthcare professionals that in their classrooms, they're still using books from, 30, 40 years ago that don't even talk about the endocannabinoid system. Graduating classes don't talk about that. I was at a conference for healthcare professionals, integrated functional medical professionals, biohackers, all that stuff. There's one person that spoke about the endocannabinoid system maybe for 10 minutes in 2 days, 3 days. So this is the thing that we need to do and standardize. It's a major system in our bodies, and we need to talk more about that and more about the system than the cannabis itself.
For you to be bringing all of this to the fore and working for the professionalization of the entire industry, making sure that people are properly trained, making sure that people taking the medicine are taking the medicine based upon actual information and data. It's as important to work in this industry as could possibly be. And can you talk about your own path, your own life in growing up? I know that you lived in Philadelphia for a while. You've had quite a story that you go over in your book.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of mentioned a little bit about, my discovery of cannabis, but I was born in Lithuania, which was at one point part of the Soviet Union, and then they became the first country that, after the fall of communism, that went and became their own country. I came to the United States when I was 6 years old. We immigrated right in the heart of the Cold War, when the 79, 1980, the US decided they're not going to participate in the Moscow Olympics. So I was the enemy of the state, but we came here for freedom, and we lived in Philadelphia. So one of the things, it's Philadelphia, and go Birds, and hopefully, after this airs, they won the Super Bowl, which will be a major thing for us. I live in LA, but I'm still a big Eagles fan. So, you know, being a kid who had to learn a language, had to learn everything from scratch, new, whose parents were never around. They worked at, put food on the table. Our furniture was from the trash. Like my dad couldn't believe that people would throw out a couch or a TV, which he was an engineer, so he could fix. And that's sort of how we started our life in the US. And having ADD or ADHD, that was its own challenge as well. But discovering cannabis was a major thing in my life. My parents didn't like that at all, and they would catch me, they would punish me, and eventually, when I was in my late teens, they ended up kicking me out. But not only kicking me out, they actually called the cops on me. So I'll never forget,
Okay.
two female police officers came in, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna lock you up." I said, "All right, it's a misdemeanor. I don't think I have any much on me." And then I remember she said, that was my, and they threw out my cannabis. I had some bowls and all that stuff. And she said, if it was my son, I would kick him the curb. So my dad goes to me, "You have 5 minutes." So I went to pack a bag, and he literally kicked me out the door. And my parents both take formulations my company produced now, so different relationship altogether. But
Yes.
I went through a stage of homelessness. No, I didn't live on the street, but I had a car. I had like $500 to my name, so I had a little bit of money. I had my clothes, so I got a motel room, and I would sleep in motel rooms, like inexpensive ones, on top of the blanket in my clothes because I wasn't don't want to touch anything in those motel rooms. And then, my girlfriend at the time let me crash with her, and her parents said I have to leave. We ended up crashing. Her friend went to Italy for 3 weeks, so we sort of broke in her place and stayed there for 3 weeks. Couch surfed a bunch of times through different friends, and the parents eventually would say, "He's got to go. He's got to go." So my grandmother at the time let me stay with her, and then she actually gave me money for down payment for deposit for my first apartment. And I got a job. I was a huge music fan, and I would go to Tower Records. For those of you that don't know, they're younger. It's the greatest record store in the world. I would spend so much time like browsing records and CDs and tapes at that time. And I got a job as a cashier at Tower Records. And then I got my first apartment. I lived in this basement apartment that every single time it would rain, it would flood. So I would call the office, a guy with a shop vac would come in, suck up the water, but it would still smell like all the underneath for like mold and mildew, and then roaches. It's so many roaches. And I would play this thing where I would call people from the office. I would catch the roach. I would pin them on this board that I had. I would show them the different types of roaches that I had. So we'd go call the exterminator. 2 days they would go away, and 2 days they're back. So it
Oh
was
my
interesting.
God.
It was interesting. And then the worst part about that it was I was laying in bed. So I had two mattresses. I didn't have a frame on it, so I slept on a mattress like box spring mattress, and I had this nightmare. There's roaches crawling on me, and I remember I'm sleeping, and it's on my face, and I flicked my face in my sleep, and I heard a sound of the roach hitting the wall. So there was actually a roach in my face, and at that time, I went and got a second job. I became a DJ in a strip club. So that was my second job, and then started going to Temple University, and I would have to go to school in the morning. So it was challenging. Went through all that and went to physical therapy school. Decided I didn't want to do that, and wanted to do music. Opened up a music company. Tower Records closed down, so opened up a music company. And my ex-wife's like, you have to get a real job. And she was my girlfriend at the time. I wasn't married yet, so we got a job at Price Waterhouse, PW first, and then with PwC, went to work for a venture capital company called Safeguard Scientific, and then went to work for another company that did on-site offshore development, and still like kept up with cannabis. But it's Pennsylvania. It wasn't legal. I didn't know what to do, but I really wanted to be in that space. Then I got into real estate, became a commercial real estate broker and managing director of Keller Williams Commercial. And my ex-wife was an actress. So go back and forth to LA and decided to move to LA, and moved her and my daughter over first. And I came a year later, was sitting in a real estate office, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. These guys came in, wanted to open an alternative pharmacy. And I was like, what do you guys really want? They're like, a dispensary. So I said, where's your paperwork? They didn't have any. So I helped them put it all together. They offered me a partnership, and I became a partner in a dispensary called Kush Kingdom. We opened up 4 more of those under the same brand. And that's my first foray into seeing two people will consume the same cannabis varietal and have a completely different experience. And I remember one of the guys who worked with us, he said, hey, I want to smoke some weed, whatever. It's like, all right, cool, man. We have some sativa dominant hybrid here, which is the most that I knew at that time. And he goes, no, that shit puts me to sleep. I said, no, it's sativa. It's supposed to be up. Indica is in the couch, right? He goes, not for me. So that really started me on the mission. And I found a video by a guy named Kevin McKernan, who claimed to be the first person to genetically sequence cannabis. Long story, a little bit longer, met with Kevin, went to work as a consultant for Medicinal Genomics, the company that he was the chief science officer for. And I was doing genetic sequencing of the plants themselves. And their parent company was called Cordian Life Sciences, and they did what's called pharmacogenomics, the study of how drugs affect individual bodies. And I really got into human genetics. And from there, I got the idea to have plant material here, plant genetics, human genetics, and bring those two together. And prior to that, I had another company. I had several exits. dabbled as an entrepreneur for a long time. So as I was working between gigs, but this other company I had with Dr. Alan Lawrence, who's a world-renowned MD, PhD, wrote like 28 books. And what we focused on was cancer patients. And he would diagnose work, and people that came to us were the ones that had 6 months to live. They were end of life. And we ended up, doing their genetic testing. I was creating formulations for them. And we had so many people, we extended lives from 6 months to 6 years. And that was sort of my initial foray into understanding that cannabis can create apoptosis for certain people, but at the very least can actually improve quality of life to mitigate the adverse effects of the prescription medication like chemo and all these other things that were going on. So that's sort of my journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it all kind of happens so organically. And are you still based in California?
Yeah, we're in Los Angeles.
Okay. All right. And do you see the future of this going pretty well? Are you seeing the doors kind of opening up where more and more people are interested in more of the medical community is willing to actually listen to you?
I believe so. I think that there's still some disconnect from some of the medical community, the MDs, but like I said, functional medical professionals are really aligned with this. We need to change laws, and that's the major thing. And we need to teach the new generation of healthcare professionals about the endocannabinoid system. But it's all plant medicine. We always have this kind of dichotomy of, oh my God, this is a plant, but most medicine was plant medicine first. It's the pharmaceutical industry that says, okay, what's the mechanism? How can we synthesize that? And if you think about it, the phases of the FDA approval are phase one is for safety. Well, they don't even look at efficacy. They want to make sure that the first phase of your clinical trial is safe. So cannabis side effects are much safer than 99% of the other prescription medications out there. The second phase is efficacy. Well, how much efficacy do we need? We need over 30% efficacy with a black box warning to show that it's working for people, most drugs. Well, placebo is like 20, 25%. So if you believe that it's working, and then you have mechanisms to prove that it's working, it's already part of the process where you're trying to heal yourself. And the third is scale. So getting this out to the masses and getting data back, that's really the way to be able to go through the FDA process and really change these molecules and make them as efficacious as they possibly can be. The more science that's included, like people say there's not enough science. Well, there's thousands and thousands of PubMed studies, clinical observational studies. The challenge is that there hasn't been enough human clinical trials. We're in a phase 2 clinical trial at Harvard, for instance, on anxiety, or how certain cannabinoids help people that have anxiety and genetic predispositions to anxiety. We are doing 5 studies in Wayne State. We're doing 3 studies in Chum in Montreal. So the more studies, the more science that we can produce, that's when healthcare professionals start adopting this a lot more.
I'm overwhelmed by the wonderful amount of detail that you go into with regard to this medicine and what we've obviously seen in the past 100 years is that what's considered big pharma Western medicine has taken predominance as the accepted form of healthcare, whereas this medicine that is quite obviously the natural variety, the kind that you can grow, the kind that you can that somebody can grow this in their backyard. This is the kind of medicine that people have been using throughout the history of mankind, whether it is the root of a tree or a plant that you can grow. And this, now that you're doing the actual work to link the way that the plant is made up with how the human being is built, what it creates. And this is the part of the podcast where I tell you what I love about you. It is creating irrefutable evidence for how we are evolved to use this kind of medicine, this kind of medicine to help us with all manner of things that we are dealing with, both psychological and physical issues of pain, issues of wellness if we're trying to rebuild a piece of our body, and do this based on evidence that the most stubborn and hard-minded of medical professionals would have to look at and go, no, I got to say that checks out. And so I'm sure that you've had plenty of moments where you have physicians look at this and go, well, that's interesting. I haven't entertained this kind of thing before.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And it's, you know, observational studies, to me, if you do it right, like a clinical trial, you're getting real world evidence immediately. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Like, I'll give you an example in Brazil, for instance. So in Brazil, the way we partner in Brazil is that you get a prescription for cannabis, they do our DNA test, then we actually ship the products that are more aligned with the individual to the person. In order for them to get a prescription for the following month, or sometimes they get it for 2 months, they have to get feedback on how well their product worked for them. And we're gathering a tremendous amount of feedback, and we're sharing that with the medical community. But there's another part of this that connects me to purpose. And overseeing a company, you sometimes don't get to interact with the people as you used to before. And I got invited to speak in Sao Paulo, got this award for their contribution to their cannabis market. But I'll never forget, there was a line of people that were waiting to speak to me with a translator. And there was this girl who was in a wheelchair, and she's partially verbal, hard to understand, but she was saying something, and you can see with her eyes, and she was with her mom communicating. And the story was that the girl was non-communicative, on a wheelchair, eyes were, and there's pictures and video before that, and they couldn't connect to their daughter. But after taking a DNA test and taking a formulation, they were able to have this connection with their daughter. And the same thing with this person was there with his mom. He said she could now walk, and she was sitting in a chair. Now mom is cooking in the kitchen again. It's such a wonderful thing, with tears. And that connects you to the people. There's a purpose of this. And modern medicine got to a point, we're really good at cutting. We're great at surgery. We're great at diagnostics. And with the AI, it's going to be even better. What we're not good is preventative medicine. If my elbow hurts, there's a shot for it. I'll go to a doctor and say, we got this, man. We'll give you a shot. It's an analgesic. You're not going to feel the pain. And my question is, pain is a signal. It's telling me there's something else. Maybe it's not my elbow. Maybe there's something else that's going on there. So for us to look at the entire body and use, some techniques from traditional Chinese medicine, we're going to what is causing this? Pain is an indicator of something. So maybe there's something else that's going on. If we can go to the root cause, we don't have to kind of numb the pain. And we in the culture in America, we're always looking to numb. And maybe sometimes that pain is an indicator of something else. So instead of numbing, let's go to the root cause. There's many examples I can give you, but there's one my mom always tells me about: stress. She's like, stress is the number one killer. Stress is the number one cause of all diseases. She's right. But, my curious mind is like, well, why and how? I'm trying to figure out. So, in our DNA test, for instance, we can see markers for stress reactivity. So to give you an example, say, Jeremy, you're walking down the street, and there's a car that pulls out of nowhere and it almost hits you. So you have this neurochemical response for their fight or flight. You have some dopamine, you have some norepinephrine, you have some cortisol, adrenaline. It's all released in your bloodstream. So when your brain realizes no lion chasing the jungle, you're safe, there's a reuptake of those neurochemicals, and then there's new neurochemicals that are released, and some of them happen to be endogenous endocannabinoids. So we're releasing anandamide and 2-AG, or bliss hormone or molecule. So when that's released, but if you have a genotype, there's a gene called FAAH, fatty acid amide hydrolase. That gene produces an enzyme that breaks down and metabolizes anandamide. So if you're that person that has that genotype, you're not producing enough anandamide. So what can happen? Look, cortisol can stay longer in your bloodstream. What will it do? Well, you can have lower your pH level, make you more acidic. It can create an overactive immune response. So that cytokine that we learned so much during COVID. So now you have an overactive immune response, and what'll happen is you feel inflammation and pain. Usually it's in your joints, ankles, knees, hips, neck, back, etc. And if you have predisposition to gut health issues, it can trigger those gut health issues like IBD. So you go to a doctor and says, oh, you have some gut health issues. Let me give you medication for that. Oh, you have some pain in your joints. We need to give you some medication to alleviate the pain. But maybe what's happening is that cortisol, your body is over responding to that. So if you're taking phytocannabinoids from the plant and you get just the right amount, you can subsidize what you're naturally not producing, your anandamide level in your 2-AG. Now you got the right ratio. Now you're actually helping your own body create its own endogenous neurochemicals that it needs to get you back to homeostasis. So instead of let me shoot you with a painkiller, let's find out what's causing that pain in the first place.
Hmm. Big question for you. How'd you make up with your dad, or did you?
It's a great question. I'm a very open book, transparent. I've been to a lot of psychotherapists, psychology. Like I believe in that. I believe in mental health. So I had this psychologist. His name was Les in Philadelphia, and great guy. Like he would come in and it was a weird doctor-patient relationship, but he kissed me on the forehead. Even he felt such empathy for me. And one day he said, "Can you bring your parents in? Do you think they would come in?" It's like, all right, we're starting to rebuild our relationship a little bit. So I came to my parents. They said, "We don't believe in this stuff, but we'll go for you." So my parents came, and I'll try to paint this visual for people that can't see this. So I'm sitting in a chair. Les is sitting next to me. My parents are sitting on the couch directly across from me. So my dad is sitting across from the psychotherapist. I'm sitting across from my mom. And Les keeps asking questions, and my dad's getting these attitude responses like, "Yeah, yeah, whatever." And he goes, "You know what? You know what? You want to know about Len? Let me tell you about Len." And he begins to tell the story. Now, at the time, I didn't remember this at all because I was a little kid. So we were living in Lithuania, still in Vilnius, and apparently there was a little street, and across this little street from where we lived, there were some stores or a store. So I went with my mom to the store. I wanted her to buy me something. I may have been 3. And she said no. So I apparently had a fit. And I walked out of the store, walked across the little street, and went to my neighbors who used to watch me when my parents were at work. My mom didn't know where I went. The lady said he walked across the street. And my mom said, I know exactly where he went. So she got me and she goes, wait till your dad gets home. So my dad tells the story. My dad got home and he goes, it was time for Len's punishment. So I don't remember if it was a belt or whatever. Usually it was. So he got me and he said, I'm hitting him and Len would not cry. And I'm hitting him harder and he still wouldn't cry. That's the kind of man Len is. And at that moment, everything shifted for me. So I had a tear and I was like, you know what? You try to beat that feeling out of me, that emotion. I'm never going to allow that again. And I had a conversation with my dad afterwards, and he said, look, there was no book. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. He goes, I'm sorry. I made mistakes. There's nothing I can do about the past, but that's where we are now. So I made the decision to say, I'm not going to allow that feeling to govern the way that I live my life. Let it go. There's nothing I can do about the past. I am here now. And let's see if we can rebuild our relationship. So that was the moment that I sort of said no more. And I talk to my dad every single day at this point. So we have a completely different relationship.
Something that my dad said to me one time in a moment of real vulnerability is and we were driving and he just goes, when I was raising you, I was a kid too. I was just trying to figure it out. And I hope that I did a good enough job, and to see your parents in that way, that they were just trying to make it work in a really confusing world, and you can build that empathy up for them, and then they can see you in that way. it makes all the difference in the world, and it takes people willing to actually have that moment. And number two, what that therapist did was extremely risky. And I have done that with patients, and I've regretted it because the parent will come in and act completely inappropriate, and it will make things worse. And so the fact that your therapist had the courage and the skill to be able to handle what came in that, that's a really seasoned therapist that could do that sort of thing. And I'm glad that you and your father are able to see each other as men and to
Yeah.
appreciate each other.
There's generational trauma, and
Yes.
my family were Holocaust survivors, so there's a lot of generational trauma from that. But there's also a pattern, and when I became a parent, I was like, well, I'm not going to repeat that pattern. My dad had the same thing happen to him. His dad had this. It was just going on from generation to generation. And my daughter was like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to try to do the opposite. And I build a relation with my daughter that I think is different, and it's completely different. I didn't do any of that stuff. And my dad gets so pissed at me one time. If he's going to listen to this, he's going to be pissed at me again. He's like, "You're such a good dad," and it was great to hear that. And I said, and I know it was the wrong thing to say, but like, I just kind of do the opposite of what you would do. And he did not appreciate that at all. But there's a little bit of truth to that.
How do people get in touch with your company and get help?
Yeah, you can go to EndoDNA, ENDO, DNA.com. That's the first place. I'm also available on every social platform, either on Len May or Len May DNA and Instagram. I think maybe on Twitter or X, whatever it is now. Also, I do a podcast called Everything is Personal, so you can grab that on anywhere you listen to podcasts or YouTube. My book, Making Cannabis Personal, is on Amazon or wherever you get books. But yeah, I'm accessible everywhere, and I appreciate these platforms. I appreciate the questions. I really feel that we need to look at this above and beyond cannabis as precision and personalized health and wellness. We're all different, even though some similarities are there's way more similarity than differences. And we have to work on the next iteration of our personal health and wellness, where we look at our genetics, we look at our epigenetics, like biological age. So one of the things we're doing right now is you do your DNA test, you have your biological age. So I'm 52, I'm biologically 47, and I want to get to 40. So here's my personalized treatment protocol. This is what I do with my lifestyle, the food that I put in my body, the exposure to different things, what exercise I do. All these different things are important to your own personalized health and wellness. Your gut microbiome, what does that look like? It's personalized to you as well. And then use things that are specific for you, that go into your body, that you're collaborating with your healthcare professionals. So that's the platform, that's the future. And for doctors to be able to go in, dynamically look up, with machine learning, it's going to make it much easier now. Dynamically look up your profile and say, you know what, you should be taking this. I'll give one last example of gut microbiome. We don't do this with our company, something we may do in the future. But when I did my gut microbiome test, one of the things it said to me that bell peppers are an inflammatory food for me. Well, think about it. I'm getting so much of my vitamins from, different vegetables, so vitamin C, vitamin D, etc. But if it's an inflammatory food that's specific for me, then when I'm consuming that, I'm also getting the inflammation. So it's working against me. So understanding those things that may be actually good and full of vitamins, they may not be aligned with you. And there's ways to change that by changing your gut microbiome with probiotics, etc. So this is what I want people to understand, that we have to collaborate with a healthcare professional. If your doctor tells you take 2 of these and call me in the morning, ask him, maybe, how do I metabolize? Did you ever do a pharmacogenomics test? Did you do a pharmacokinetic test? And ask for your doctors to do these things.
Amazing. Thank you for bringing such an incredible wealth of knowledge here because I feel like I need to kind of go back and watch this myself a couple of times. I just appreciate you really bringing it here.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the platform. I appreciate sharing.
Absolutely. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the Mindful Mutiny podcast. Everything helps us grow. And in a lifetime, there's more decisions than anybody can count. Living the highest form of yourself is the most rewarding thing that you can do. Make incredible, positive, risky, and bold decisions to be the highest version of yourself. Now go be something great.